So I realize that I'm both literally and figuratively standing between you and like 15 boxes of pizza that just showed up. So there's a minimum number of shots of food in the deck, but I will try to be brief. So I'm going to talk about something actually somewhat related to the previous talk, where like the intersection of software and actually having to deal with real world, like actually messy kind of things that happen. I come from a background, Foursquare, Google, where it was all digital. We're kind of pushing bits out. You can release things, and like you kind of have a very controlled environment either on the phone or on the web. And you expect data to kind of behave in the way that you planned it to behave. I mean, obviously users are messy and they do things you don't expect, but it's a little bit more of a controlled environment. And when you go out and you actually try to read a genome, or you try to pack a box full of food and get it out the door, things get a little messier. So I'm going to try to just talk about a few of the things that happen when you try to make, this is pretty much the only shot of real food in the deck. You try to put this box of food together. It's not just one box of food. We do this about 8 million times a month now. So it really, like the scale that we're operating at is pretty significant, and things kind of go wrong in weird ways. So just kind of also illustrate kind of where we are. This is a map of the about 150, 200 small farms that we work with across the country. They produce everything from fairy tale eggplants to pink lemons to poultry and beef. They happen to be clustered around the 3 fulfillment centers we operate. So we actually run our own fulfillment. We're not drop shipping things. We have fulfillment centers in Jersey City, in Arlington, Texas, and in Richmond, California. And we are shipping food to those fulfillment centers. We're storing it, we're refrigerating it. We are prepping it, we're packing it. We're trying to get it to our customers as quickly and as freshly as possible, with obviously very few quality problems or warm boxes or anything else like that. And then this is just a very small sample, about 0.5% of the users that are actually getting boxes. You can see that from these farms going in here, pretty much shipping to the entire continental United States. There's a couple of people somewhere in North Dakota that we can't get to in 2 days, but we're working on it. And so the kind of movement of this food, and really it's less than 7 days between the time that a piece of an eggplant is picked on the field, ideally, and the time it gets to your doorstep. So how do we kind of like move food around the country at that scale and try to minimize the amount of minimize cost, minimize quality problems, and really try to deliver a good product every single time. So I don't know about you, but I signed up for Blue Apron about a year ago. I thought this was a beautiful, simple product. It must be really easy. Just like this fresh food just shows up at my door. It's just like going to the grocery store. Things show up. It's really the tip of the iceberg. So you have to think about forecasting. There's $1 million swings in our business based on whether or not we can figure out how many eggplants we're going to need, how much poultry we're going to need. We're thinking about the farms themselves, how we can make small farms more productive, how we can help them grow sustainably, help the environment. Everything we ship is perishable, except maybe like some spices or something. But everything else, we really need to think about keeping it refrigerated, getting it there fresh. We obviously think a lot about food safety. This is one of the most important things that we do. People are literally putting our product into their bodies. We want to make sure that it comes out the best possible way every single time. Big logistics and fulfillment. This is kind of basically Amazon with fresh food, so that's a big problem for us. We want to minimize waste. We talk a little about this later, but we have significantly less waste in our supply chain than the grocery store business, so we want to keep that down. It helps us keep costs down, but also is a huge environmental impact as well. Food production is much more damaging to the environment than any sort of packaging or cardboard recycling or things like that. Every week we ship different food, so it's not like we just stock up on eggplants and we're going to use them forever, but literally every week we have different recipes. And then lastly, from a consumer perspective, the subscription mechanics are very different than the traditional kind of like download a game, use Google, use Foursquare. So I'm not going to go over all of this. I will try to get through in about 15 minutes these three bits, but I could talk for hours about all of the different problems that we face. So first off, demand forecasting. Has anyone ever worked at a business that had to do demand forecasting? A couple of tentative hands in the back. So this is something that I'd never had to do either. So I'd never worked at a business that really relied on predicting the future, on trying to understand what our users are going to do, like 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, even 10, 12 months down the road. For us, we're actually going out to a small farm and saying, hey, could you guys grow 150 acres of fairy tale eggplant, and we will promise to buy them in 6 months when you harvest them. But that's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for the farm. They can actually rely on a constant price for that eggplant, which is something that small farms often can't rely on. But for us, we need to make sure that we can actually use that. Even coming up on like shorter term orders, like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, things like hiring, building facilities, you know, all of those things kind of come together. We want to make sure, obviously, to keep our costs down. So the big questions we're trying to answer are how many boxes will we ship that week? In those boxes, each box contains 2, 3, 4 recipes. How many which recipes will actually be ordered? Because that obviously affects our supply chain and sourcing teams in terms of the food. And then where will we ship them? Which facilities are going to be, you know, shipping 50,000, you know, boxes? Are going to be shipping 10,000 on a Tuesday? You know, how many people we're going to have to bring in? Are we going to need temps? You know, there's a lot of labor questions, a lot of food sourcing questions that go along with that. So this is the way we used to do it. This is not actually a spreadsheet that we use. It's the one I got off of Google, but there was this big spreadsheet that floats around the company, and then a couple of people, you know, on the finance team who are absolutely amazing stare at it for a while and then come out with a number and, you know, kind of say, we're going to do this many boxes this week. And actually, they do a really impressive job. They have very low error, you know, and then it obviously kind of gets closer and closer as we come up on the week. But as we continue to expand the product and we talk about offering more choices, more recipes, you know, more variety in the food, this just doesn't scale. So of course, you know, I show up and we're going to try science. You know, this is going to be fun. We're throwing machine learning at this. This is very early days for this. So I'm kind of like talking about some work that's still going on. But we're going to try to machine learn this one. So we're going to think about the user and try to predict on a per user basis, you know, what does this user like? What are their demographics? What are their order patterns? What day of the week do they order? That has a big effect on, you know, especially during the summer, like we see big fluctuations for people that go on vacation, and that actually varies based on what day of the week they come out. It affects holiday order rates as well. When did they last order? Do they skip a lot? Do they order every week? Are they very reliable? What have they rated recipes in the past? What ingredients are going into this recipe? I'll talk about in a second. People are very sensitive to prep time. So like people don't want to cook a recipe that takes a half hour to prep, but they'll really will order one that only takes 10 or 15 minutes to prep. Which protein is in it? There's a lot of polarizing ingredients. People really don't like catfish, you know, like even though we think that we're making a great recipe. So we put all of these things into a big, right now it's a big random forest model. We're looking at other approaches as well, and try to predict for each user how many recipes will they order, and then kind of a ranked list of which recipes they're most likely to put into their box in a given week. And this is kind of what pops out the other side. So the top graph here is basically the error rate for the number of meals that we'll predict. And we kind of classify our meals into these buckets for the couples plan based on loosely what kind of protein is going to be in the box. And the bottom graph here is kind of like, as you kind of come in, the total error overall, kind of collapsing all of those lines. So some things we learned as we're starting to go through this, holidays are really tough. And this is kind of a general machine learning problem, is like exceptions are really hard for machines to understand. You know, like the consistent week over week, you know, like all of these other times, the machine can kind of see patterns and kind of understand what's going on. The error stays like within a certain band. But when you have exceptional cases, machine has a really tough time coping. So we're starting to look at different features we could put in that will really try to give the machine an edge to say, this is going to be, in this case, this was going into Memorial Day, I believe. You know, this is going to be a tough week for you to predict. So really try to fork the decision tree and kind of give it something on the dividing boundary to grab onto. The other nice thing about the model, which we obviously hoped would happen, but did happen, is that the error rate declines as we get closer to delivery day. So the time is kind of, you know, this is kind of number of weeks out that we're predicting. So if you're predicting next week, you have a fairly low error rate. If you're trying to predict 6 months in the future, things are a little bit fuzzier, but you know, still within a reasonable bound, so we can start to make some sort of decisions on how many boxes and how much ordering we're going to have to do. And again, this is early days, so. So this is trying to predict, basically saying which of these recipes will actually be ordered. So what % of the total orders will be, you know, the fish recipe that week, the meat, the poultry, and the vegetarian recipes. So some things that popped out here that were pretty interesting. People don't like lamb, it turns out. So whenever there's a lamb recipe on the menu, this meat recipe drops off, and people order the fish instead. Sometimes they'll actually go over and order one of the vegetarian recipes. And this kind of starts to point the way towards these polarizing recipes, something that we didn't get out of the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is just kind of looking at very, very kind of smooth curves and trying to look at the way the whole population behaves. But when you actually start to look at a per user basis and you give the machine some features to grab onto, it'll say, oh, lamb. The lamb on the recipe, user doesn't order lamb, or user has a preference against lamb, or user tends to skip lamb. And that's kind of an interesting feature there. So that's kind of the machine learning part. Second problem is fulfillment. So this is our wonderful operations and warehouse software team. When they were out about a month ago in our Jersey City facility trying to ship an alpha version or something, there was a lot of laptops involved in alpha work when you're shipping things in a real world environment like this. We just kind of literally sit down, and on the line is a laptop plugged into a scanner, and we kind of watch the boxes go down and see how things are going. So you think about this problem, from that kind of like software perspective. This is just inventory management. You're just shipping a bunch of things. This has been a solved problem for years and years and years. People have been running warehouses for a long time. Big difference when you're actually trying to ship fresh food in this kind of environment. So first of all, like I mentioned, every week we have different recipes. Normally in like an Amazon warehouse, for instance, you would have the same SKUs and you're just kind of constantly shipping them over and over and over again, like that DVD of The Big Lebowski that you really love, like that's always the same SKU. In this case, we actually have very different SKUs, not only for the products and the recipes themselves, but the food turns over time, and so we have different things that we're actually trying to track in inventory. The farm sourcing team needs to think about, on the supply chain side, like how are we going to get food into the warehouse on time that the culinary team is planning recipes for in a good basis. And so when you're doing this at a small scale, not a big deal. If you run out of saffron or run out of lamb or something, you run down to the supermarket and you grab a couple of pounds of lamb. If you're trying to do 8 million of these every month, you need to plan ahead. And so that creates problems both with storage, creates problems of trying to understand the user behavior and trying to source things at this scale. Food safety is a big concern. So food safety really just comes down to keeping track of things and then making sure that you're auditing all the behaviors in the warehouse. So we built an amazing company on a lot of operational things, but now that we actually have software looking at the warehouse every step, we can say that piece of fish came from this supplier, landed on the dock at this time, was checked in, was put into the refrigerator. We made sure that it was frozen or that it was stored in the proper way. And there's a real audit trail that kind of goes on throughout the warehouse. Human factors are huge. We have thousands of hourly employees associates working in the warehouse that are sitting on the line packing boxes. There's often temp workers. There's people that are just starting. So making sure that they actually get trained, that they follow the standard operating procedure for the line. When we do make a change, so we roll out new software, to be very, very thoughtful about how we actually train people and explain it to them. Sometimes it's very easy for someone on the line to not realize that this is actually going to make the whole product better, even if it makes their life, there's one more scan that they have to do, or there's one more step in their procedure in terms of getting a piece of eggplant into the box. But if you explain it to them, you do training, you demonstrate the value overall, and you give them the context for why we're making this change, they're excited. They want, they're customers too. They want to see high quality food go out, so you make them a participant in that process, and the change management goes over a lot more easily. And then finally, the X factor of shipping these things, this affects any logistics company. Weather, Winter Storm Jonas last year was a huge deal. Like we had to reroute packages all over the country, and we managed to come through pretty well, actually. Most people got their box within 1 day of when they were supposed to get it. And people on the West Coast weren't affected at all. And that's a huge, obviously huge shout out to our operations team for being able to move things around and us for making the software to make that possible. You lose packages, getting through the last mile delivery, like making sure that the FedEx guy knows that this box contains perishable goods and you shouldn't leave it like on the corner or like in direct sunlight, try to those things are not quite as much in our control, but we do as much as we can to try to prevent against that, pack extra ice, think about summer temperatures versus winter temperatures. So all of these things kind of flow together, and the key is like how much software can we build to actually control and kind of minimize the quality issues every step of the way. So all of this started as spreadsheets and whiteboards and Post-it notes. Like I said, our operations team is amazing. This company was basically built on a bunch of this, but at some point, if you accidentally walk by your whiteboard and you erase 2 million orders, like the business is not going to be stable and sustainable. So we moved it to software, and so we built, basically, we actually, you see the Blue Apron consumer product with a mobile app, with a website, and you think that's the product. But we actually ship 12, 14 different pieces of software, and most of them are to our internal customers. So we have a shipping dashboard that the operations and logistics team look at every day to make sure we're packing boxes, that they're making their pull times to put all of those boxes onto a truck. That when they see exceptions or they know that they're going to be late or there's an ingredient missing, all of those things can kind of be tracked and audited, and we make sure we do better tomorrow. We have a kitchen spec, a piece of software for the kitchen spec, so that if you're going out and purchasing ginger or boneless, skinless chicken breasts, you can actually say, this is how much we need of it, this is the price we're getting, does this need to be refrigerated, is it portioned, or is it bulk? We built a lot of software for our culinary team. They're writing new recipes every week. We want them to pair, obviously, very strongly with our purchasing team to make sure that they're basically writing recipes that use the ingredients that we have available to us at the scale that we know that we can deliver for high quality. And these are just three of, as I said, about a dozen pieces of software, everyone from the customer support team to the guy that's checking in a pallet full of eggplant at the warehouse gets their own piece of software. And that means that we have this process that was talked about before of testing, of speccing, of releasing, of iterating, of trying to understand users. The benefit is that all of our users work for us in those cases. We can literally go out to the warehouse and watch that person and say, why did you unplug that scanner? And they'll tell us, well, it was beeping and it was really annoying. And so we'll say, okay, well, we'll make sure that it doesn't beep anymore because we need to know that that box went through and it got shipped. So our goals here, like as I said, we want to automate everything. We want to try to get software involved in every single step of the way. We want to track and trace everything. It's really, really important from a food safety perspective and from a quality perspective and from a cost perspective to understand where every piece of food and where every box is as it goes to the warehouse, despite the fact that when you actually go there and look on the ground, it might seem like chaos. It's really important to get out of the office when you're dealing with these sorts of issues. You can kind of sit here in New York and think about software in an abstract sense and think that like what you're building is going to be used perfectly, kind of the way that you might be able to build a gene sequencer and think that it's going to come out perfect every time. But if you actually go and you watch someone and you see them with the iPad on the line where they're packing asparagus and they go on break and you're like, why are they going on break? And it turns out that they're using their break time to switch out the pallet of asparagus and put in a new one and then going off of break because it increases their boxes per minute that they're doing. They're basically abusing the system and saying, like, I can get a higher rating on my incentive by going on break for 60 seconds. And you want to understand that and prevent it and try to get them to really pack that asparagus in the way that we expected them to. You would never have seen that if you hadn't actually gone out to the warehouse and watched them sitting there and pressing the iPad when they weren't supposed to. As I mentioned, your users work for you, so you can ask them questions. That's a really great asset. You can't ask all of the millions of users that use your app and actually go out and survey them all. But if there's a couple thousand of them and they work for you, you can actually sit them down and see which parts of the software they are easy and hard for them. Testing is really important. When you ship things, we try to automate as much as possible. Obviously, like everyone that does testing in this room probably tries to use automated testing, unit testing, integration, release, acceptance testing. But there's no substitute for actually going out and standing on that pack line and watching someone use your software and seeing it break, writing that down, and then going and iterating and iterating and iterating, and trying to understand how you can make the best possible software. And then as mentioned before, change management is a huge deal. So you really want to think about, as you're rolling things out, how can you train people for it so they're not dealing with the unexpected. We've had a lot of results with this. So I just kind of want to highlight this. The study came out this week. The Blue Apron supply chain has significantly less waste than the grocery store. So the USDA did a study a few years ago that showed that 34% of food that goes into a grocery store through the whole supply chain gets thrown away at some point, whether it's because it's overstocking at the grocery store itself, whether it's people buying and taking home more food than they actually use. And it kind of breaks out into the retail side and the customer side itself. And so we had contracted an independent auditor to come through and do a similar study for us. And they found that through a combination of diary studies for users and actually going to people's homes, as well as visiting our warehouses and looking at our supply chain, that we're wasting 62% less food. And the waste is decreased across both our warehouses and our consumers, because we're sending just the right amount of food, obviously, and we also minimize waste in the warehouse through all of that automation that I was talking about before. And this is a big deal because the food waste itself is one of the most environmentally impactful parts of our overall food supply chain. So every little bit that we can attack that comes back in terms of less methane and carbon dioxide in the air and less fertilizer and things used on fields for food that never gets eaten. So the last bit that I want to talk about is kind of what it's like to work on a subscription model kind of product. Subscription is a little bit different. If you download a game, you download Foursquare, you download Google, you're kind of you're hoping the user will come back and use your app when they need it. Speaking from experience at Foursquare, we aggressively use things like notifications to say, hey, this is the time when it's interesting to use our app. Like, it would be good for you to come and look for a restaurant or check in. And that was kind of the mindset that I always had, was you have to go out and tell the user when your app is going to be useful. The one nice thing about a subscription model product is that there's like this very regular weekly kind of cadence to the way that the user interacts with you. Every week, we're going to send them an email and say, we're on our way, new box is going to show up, they're going to get it, they're going to have a good time, they're going to come back and do it over again. But it creates all these weird side effects, both opportunities and side effects, I think, to the way that users interact with our product. So every week, it's great. Every week is an opportunity to kind of have a little bit deeper engagement with the user. Maybe the first time they show up, they've just heard of us, maybe they got an invite from a friend or a gift, and they think they were just food. They don't even know, like, is this meals or is this a grocery store? They get one, they understand it. The next week, maybe you introduce them to the idea that they can change their recipes. They can say, I don't want lamb this week. Instead of skipping, maybe they'll. The next week, maybe we say, hey, did you know we have a wine program? Would you like to order bottles of wine to go along with your meal? You can kind of upgrade them to things like instructional content. Like, do you know how to dice an onion? Or do you know how to prepare like chicken in this way? So that's the opportunity. The flip side is that every time you talk to someone, it's an opportunity for them to remember your product and not, and like kind of interact with it in a weird way. So this is the graph of when people switch their recipes, like change their menu or skip the week, based on how far out from the delivery day they are. And we got this graph and we looked at it and we're like, I don't really understand what's going on. Why is there this kind of spiky pattern to it? And it turns out that this is when we send the email that says, we're on our way, we're going to send you our box. So this we would expect, like you were like, we're about to ship you your box, and you go and you change it. But it also creates this kind of trailing effect for all of the weeks kind of going out. You go in to change 1 week, and you're going to look at your menu for all the weeks kind of coming up. This is kind of surprising, and a lot of our metrics on the consumer side actually look like this, where that one little bit of engagement, either they get their box or that we send them an email, creates a whole cascade of user actions that you wouldn't normally see. And so we started to build things around this, like sending the emails with additional instructional content or looking for opportunities to upsell you when you land on that meal picker to say, here's other parts of the product that you might be interested in. So some of the lessons we learned, I guess, and obviously are continuing to learn, frequent communication with the user, obviously it has both these pluses and minuses. It can drive engagement, it can drive them to new parts of the product, but it can also drive churn. That's a reminder that you have this product and maybe this is something that they don't want anymore. In order to drive the decisions that we make, you need a really, really strong understanding of the lifetime value of your product. And this is something that we do, like literally every day I have a conversation about how to understand the lifetime value of a Blue Apron customer. Like understanding like which marketing channel they came in through, understanding which actions drive value or drive order rate. Every experiment that we run is driven by those kind of optimizations and thinking about the value that we provide to the customer and obviously the lifetime value that they have to us. Because of this like weekly subscription kind of event, it takes sometimes a little bit longer to run experiments. So you want to see these things actually go through several cycles for a user. With a normal consumer product, maybe you can run an experiment for a week and you'll get significance. For us, you've got to run that for 2, 3, 4 weeks and actually go through a few cycles to understand whether or not your change had any sort of significant impact. And this is probably something that everyone really thinks about in terms of experiments, but you always want two kind of like opposing metrics whenever you're looking at experiments. So for instance, looking at our marketing and growth channels, the thing pushing up, any sort of experiment is going to be how many registrations did we get? Like, did users actually come through the door? But the thing that might push down any optimism about that is going to be, did like all those users churn, and did they actually order their second or third or fourth box? So when you're setting up, the goals for the team, you always want to have one metric that's kind of pushing up, and another set of metrics that are going to kind of counter that, so that you can kind of look at things and say, there's a tension here, and we can't only optimize one dimension. You want to have something like a little bit of a check or a balance on it. So anyway, so that was kind of a very, very brief, accelerated run-through of some of the problems that we're facing, and obviously there's a lot more here. And that's about it, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't help but ask one. So other than lamb and catfish, any other polarizing ingredients?
Yeah, eggplant itself is actually a polarizing ingredient. I personally don't like eggplant, so I'll skip those. Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, a lot of them are things like like people like chicken, but they don't like chicken with bones in it. So if you have like a bone-in chicken thigh or something like that, people tend to skip that more often. Sometimes it's a certain preparation style. Like people don't like spicy food, so people love spicy food, but those tend to even out a little bit more. Yeah.
So for your machine learning, do you break it up only for vegetarian versus meat, or do you go down to the ingredient level?
Yeah, we go down to the ingredient level. Yeah. So again, those are kind of rolled up because that's how we think about. Every week there's 6 recipes, and we think about slots for the recipes in terms of how culinary prepares it. So that's how we broke out those graphs. But each week we're actually looking at the individual ingredients. Yeah.
Because for me personally, after 3 weeks of Swiss chard, I kind of
polarizing
I'm
ingredient.
done.
There you go.
All right, time for one more before pizza. All right, just shout it. So,
I'll repeat it. Yeah.
Do you change the menu based on where people are ordering from, or different? Are you shown different availabilities based on customer segments, or is it everywhere? All the customers have the same menu availability?
Yeah. So the question was, do we change the menu? Is it customized to based on where the user is ordering from, or different user segments? Do they see the same recipes? Right. No, is the answer. Everyone sees the same menu. There is a 2-person plan, couples plan and a family plan with 4 servings per week per meal. Those have different recipes on a given week, but within the couples plan, everyone ordering from the couples plan sees the same thing for now, and that's just mostly for logistics and supply chain reasons. Is like there's 10 recipes a week between the 2 plans, and we kind of churn through those.
Even for split testing? So
Yeah.
If you're doing testing, you do it across different weeks?
Right. So can we test? You're saying can we test different recipes, basically?
Yeah.
I would love to be able to do that, but we can't. So it'd be great to say like, do people like catfish or not? But right now we're kind of doing that on a like this week, next week basis. And again, like just the logistics, even of trying different amounts of ice in a box is hard to set up. So we wanted to do experiments. There's a tricky balance when you're shipping a bunch of food between putting enough ice in so the box sits on your doorstep for 6 hours until you get home and it's still cold, versus putting so much ice in that the zucchini comes out frozen and damaged. And so like there's a very delicate kind of balance of making sure you have the right amount of ice in the box. And even setting up experiments for that is a very difficult like logistics as it's flowing down the line, because there's things like how many days is it going to be shipped? Like is it 1 day, 2 day shipping? Is that truck refrigerated? Is it going like what is the environment where it's landing? Is it Florida or is it Maine or is it is Seattle? So all of controlling for all those things, I want to get there as an engineer. I want to get to the point where we can do those sort of operational A/B experiments. But right now it's pretty ad hoc. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, so I was wondering about based on whether you had enough supply of a certain ingredient in one area, you had it all in Florida and there.
Right. So whether or not our supply chain basically. So because we have the 3 fulfillment centers, we just make sure that we have the right amount of ingredients in each of those 3. We're preparing all the recipes in all of the fulfillment centers.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks.